All right, everybody. Thank you for joining Men of the Scarlet and Gray Live, podcast number 20, special edition here, talking more recruiting. Today we're going to have special guests with talk about that team up north and their recruiting class. And later on, we're going to have another special guest talking about Penn State and their class. Today, joined here with Chip. How you doing today, Chip?
Doing well, Shannon. How about yourself?
Doing pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and let Chip take over the show today, and I'm going to sit in the background and do some catch up on some other things. So go ahead and, Chip, take her away.
All right. Well, thank you, Shannon, for that warm introduction. I would like to extend a warm welcome for a first-time guest of the Men of the Scarlet and Gray podcast, Mr. David Mormino. Am I pronouncing that right, David?
100%, spot on.
Okay, so just to kind of give a little background for our listeners, and if I slight you in any way, it is not intentional. I just want to make sure that I'm doing this all correctly. David can be reached via Twitter at David Mormino, Mormino. On his Twitter profile, he lists himself as a proud member of the Big House Report staff and a co-host on at Go Blue Radio. Is there anything else I should be identifying for our listeners of the podcast, David?
No, I'm a very humble man, so you guys don't have to worry about that. I'll try to do my best to not mention the M word as much today. I understand that that's a big thing in the state of Ohio, so I will try my best to not use that as much as I possibly can.
Well, we appreciate all of your best efforts on that. So, so let's just. Like I said, I've got a bunch of questions for you as it relates to. I will refer to Michigan. With my last name being Minnick, it's kind of difficult to not use the letter M on a daily and consistent basis. So. The first question I had for you is obviously it was a smaller class by any account, regardless of and I know in terms of like scholarship count, that's a big concern. 14 kids were signed. I guess the first question I had for you, of the 14 players that were signed by Michigan, have any or how many have enrolled already at the University of Michigan for spring football?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is quarterback commit Alex Malzone. He is a 3-star by 24/7 Sports, in 88 overall. I know that he is an early enrollee, and I believe Brian Cole he's a defensive back, a 4-star by 24/7, and also joining him would be Tyree Kinnell, a fellow 4-star by 24/7. So those are the key. Early enrollees that will get a head start on spring football and try to make a name for themselves in this class. Malzone will be joined with Zach Gentry. Gentry was not an early enrollee, but he's the second of 2 quarterbacks in this class. But the early enrollees, as mentioned, were Alex Malzone, Tyree Kinnell, and Brian Cole.
Okay, so you have 3 early enrollees. So of these players who enrolled early, do you anticipate any of these players, all these players, being able to have an immediate impact in new Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh's first year?
Well, the one that I think that will make a significant impact will be Brian Cole. Cole is as advertised, 6'2", 190. He's an impressive player, and he's a playmaker. So I think that Michigan definitely needs that on the defensive side of the ball. If they're going to win games this year, they're going to have to rely on their defense, and they will have a secondary that will be fine to the football. And I think that if Cole has a good spring and a good fall camp, I think he can make waves to be the opposing Lewis. He is a guy that will bring a lot of intensity, and he'll bring that ball hawking ability. He might actually end up playing wide receiver if defensive back doesn't really fit him as well. So he will be making an impact. It's just what side of the ball he chooses. He's an explosive wide receiver as well. And I know that Michigan is going to need as many playmakers on any side of the ball. If anybody watched Michigan last season, you understand the dumpster fire that we all saw. So if they can get playmakers like Cole on the field early, I think that will help them tremendously.
So I'm going to come back to Cole here in a little bit. because again, being an Ohio guy, born and bred, lived here pretty much my entire life. Looking at Michigan's recruiting class, there were only 3 players from the state of Ohio that were signed. One of them you mentioned Tyree Cannell. They also signed place kicker Andrew David and an offensive lineman by the name of Nolan Ulizio. I'm not sure if I'm mispronouncing anyone's last name. It is unintentional. I can promise you that. So of those 3, David, Cannell, and Ulizio, none of those 3 players had offers from Ohio State. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is traditionally under legendary coaches like Bo Schembechler, Gary Moeller, Lloyd Carr, Michigan has traditionally tried to lure the top players from the state of Ohio up to Ann Arbor. And, much to the chagrin of Ohio State fans such as myself and Shannon and anyone else who knows anything at all about the history of the rivalry between Ohio State and Michigan. So I guess my long-winded foray into a question is that what concerns do you have as a Michigan fan regarding Michigan's ability to effectively recruit in Ohio, considering the emphasis that Ohio State head coach Urban Meyer has placed upon keeping the best players in the state?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. Urban Meyer is a wizard when it comes to recruiting, and he's a wizard when it comes on as a football coach. So you got to give him as much credit as possible because he is arguably the best football coach in the country right now. And I think almost anybody you ask will say the same thing. So I think that him being able to keep a lid on Ohio is huge, and you've noticed that. And the players that they've brought in from Ohio have made significant impacts throughout his tenure here. You've seen cases where Michigan has brought in big-time guys from Ohio and made them into serviceable football players. But, with the talent they had on the roster coming from Ohio under Brady Hoke wasn't able to develop the talent. So I think a big factor in this whole thing is that Urban Meyer is probably selling that, saying, these guys may have left the state, but the best players stay in Ohio, and that is a huge recruiting pitch, and so far it seems to be working. You notice that the guys who stay at home kind of have that chip on their shoulder, saying, this is my state, I'm going to represent it in the scarlet and gray, or whatever state they come from. But if Urban Meyer is able to keep a lid on Ohio, I think that it's going to be an incredible, maybe possibly 10-year war again between him and Jim Harbaugh with the recruiting, with the products on the field. So I think that as a Michigan fan, what I'm concerned about is that the Midwest is a recruiting, like, I don't know how to explain this. It's a beautiful place to pick up football players because you see so many stars have come out of the Midwest, and I think that if you have the coaching staff like Urban Meyer does, it's an easy sell, especially for the school. The success it's had on the football field recently. It should definitely concern Michigan fans, considering how much talent is in the Midwest and how much talent is in Ohio itself. Like you said, the legendary coaches like Bo and Lloyd Carr have been able to be able to lure the Ohio players. But recently, you haven't seen that trend. With this class, there's only been 3, and one of them was a place kicker. So, it's not as plentiful as it was before. So I think that if Jim Harbaugh is able to go into Ohio and recruit well, Michigan has a significant chance to compete with them within 1 or 2 years. But if they can keep the talent in state, Michigan's going to have a tough time.
Shannon, do you have a comment? Because I can see that you might, or it looks like you have maybe something you wanted to ask David.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I mean, talking about the in-state talent and everything, like the excuse me, the Mike Weber situation.
Right.
Is that just? I mean, I know everything's kind of died down now with what Weber's come out and said. He's happy with the new coach that's on board and everything, but with everything what is that, Castech?
Castech, yes.
Yeah, that high school football coach that he came out and said, I mean, is that going to be an issue for Ohio State for years to come and open the door for Harbaugh, or is that just a smokescreen, do you think?
See, that's an interesting thing because Cass Tech has been a pipeline for both schools in recent years. So there is a lot of talent there, but I know a lot of their coaching staff feel like Mike Weber was done wrong and he was lied to, but at the same time, people need to understand that Weber committed to Ohio State, not to a running back coach, and I think that's number one that people haven't realized. Mike is a Michigan guy, and it would have been nice to see him stay in state and go to Michigan. But after all, this is his decision, and he didn't do himself any favors by committing after Michigan lost to Ohio State to a rival program just minutes, or actually I think it was during the game. So I mean, it is an interesting situation because that will affect some of the kids that are there because they are friends with Mike, and I think ultimately people need to look at the big picture because it's not a player that is committing to one coach, and I think that's a lot of things recruits don't take into consideration anymore is because they're getting an education from the university, not from coaches themselves. And coaches leave all the time. We've seen it happen on signing day. We've seen it happen days after signing day. We've seen it happen days before signing day. So I think it could definitely hurt Ohio State maybe in the next year or the next 2 years. But I think once Weber comes back home to Michigan and he explains the situation, I think that people are going to understand him more, and they're going to understand that this was a decision that he made himself. This was not a gun pointed to his head saying you need to come to Ohio State or else or you won't be able to play anywhere. He had offers from a lot of schools, and he chose to go to Ohio State. And they may have made a coaching change, or their coach may have accepted an NFL job, but I don't want to be mean to say it, but recruits have to do their homework. If you're going to be talking to a coach and he's going to be selling you the program, listen to what he has to offer as far as the school aspect and what the football team can bring you later in life, not just the man himself. And I think that if he goes in and he explains it to his coaching staff, currently his high school coaching staff, and said, I may have made a mistake here. I'm not happy with my decision, or I felt like I wasn't done correctly. I would understand why they would feel upset towards Ohio State, but at the same time, you need to understand what you're getting into, and I think that was something that was lost in this whole process. And as far as the T-shirt, when he was working out, I don't know if anybody saw that, but he was seen working out in Ohio in a Michigan shirt, and I think people went nuts over that for no reason at all. It's just a shirt. I wear Power Ranger shirts. It doesn't mean I'm a Power Ranger. It's just something that I think that
you could be though.
That's the thing. I could be. We'd never know. The only issue I have with it is that people are getting involved with it because it's a Michigan-Ohio State thing. I think if it was Weber choosing between, say, Ohio State and like Virginia Tech or just any other school that wasn't Michigan, I don't think it would be as a crazy deal as it is now. I think that people just realized that they weren't sure if they were going to get a running back commit. They ultimately did, but they weren't sure if they were going to. So I think people went nuts because they weren't sure of what talent they were going to get brought into Michigan. So, I mean, it was a situation that blew over quickly, thank God, because I know if you saw Twitter after signing day, people were going nuts and people's hairs were on fire, and there were hashtags saying free Mike Weber and like all this stuff. It was mind-blowing because it was almost like Ohio State completely ripped up his scholarship and said you can't play here anymore, which was not the case at all. They said you're more than welcome to play here, and he ultimately stayed. So I think that people need to realize that Ohio State has much more to offer than just one running back coach, and they've showed it on the field. Like I said before, they're a national champion for a reason. That you don't just stumble upon wins against Alabama and Oregon on accident. You don't just fall into the college football playoff. So Mike is in a good situation going to Ohio State. So I don't think people need to be up in arms as much as they are.
So I guess a quick question,
Sure.
Something you mentioned just a moment ago, and Shannon kind of alluded to, with the coaching staff and at Michigan, and it's. Do you, as a Michigan fan, do you second guess the Michigan coaching staff for offering another running back in Karen Higdon after telling Mike Weber that Weber was going to be the only running back in the class. Do you think that that hurt Michigan's chances? Do you think that that was something that you said, that Michigan wanted to they didn't want to necessarily put all their eggs in one basket, so to speak, with Mike Weber, and they wanted to make sure that they had a running back in their recruiting class? Now, obviously, they probably would have loved to have landed both, but they probably had some concerns that they were going to be able to flip Weber back from Ohio State. Do you second guess that, or what are your thoughts on that? I'm not trying to, I guess as a fan, I'm not trying to get you to necessarily bash the coaching staff. I'm just curious in terms of do you second guess that decision?
Right. Looking at the big picture, you can't just expect one guy to come in and decommit immediately because a new coaching staff came in. It's really tough to say that that he would be the only one recruited, because ultimately they needed to bring in somebody. They couldn't come in empty-handed, and they may have promised Mike the world, but there was a decision to be made by Higdon himself. So I guess it was really just who chose first. Higdon is a 4-star himself, so he's no slouch. So I think that Mike may have been upset about that, and I think that may have helped sway his decision a little bit. But I don't think it was one thing that made his decision to go to Ohio State. I don't think it was them offering another running back, because they needed, like I said, they needed to bring another guy in. They have injuries at the running back position frequently, almost 2 or 3 guys hurt a year. So they needed to bring in somebody this season, and if it was Ohio State for a long time, and Harbaugh had to make a move. I don't second guess it, because there is a lot of opportunity to bring in different guys, and guys who have many different talents. So I think that settling for Higdon, or trying to bring in both, was a good move on Harbaugh's part, because ultimately he doesn't get left empty-handed, and he has somebody he can work with, and a talented running back in that. So it is a very, very solid consolation prize. As a Michigan fan, I would definitely have had preferred Weber to go to Michigan, because Ohio State is getting a very serious talent running back in Mike Weber. But at the end of the day, there needed to be pen to paper from somebody, and it happened to be Karan Higdon rather than Mike Weber. So I can't fault Harbaugh for doing it, because ultimately he brought in a second quarterback as well. So you could say that he was the only guy recruited at the running back position, but like I said, at the end of the day, there needed to be somebody brought in, and it just happened to be a running back not named Mike Weber. It sucks, but it is what it is. I hate to say that as like a cop-out answer, but I think that at the end of the day, Harbaugh needed a guy that will bring results on the football field, and if it was going to be Mike Weber would have been recruited a bit harder, or if it was Karan Higdon, then he's going to be a guy that needs to step up.
Well, I appreciate your the way that you gave I don't want to say praise, but that you looked at this as objectively as I believe a Michigan fan possibly could, because with Mike Weber being the target of not only Ohio State but Michigan, and as you said, other schools. I think nobody likes to be told no, and especially from, as you said, kind of a considered pipeline school. So I'm not, as an Ohio State fan, I am not going to sit here and suggest that the way that this played out with Mike Weber reflected well upon Ohio State, because if Stan Drayton knew that he was going to be leaving after signing day, then I believe both he and Coach Meyer should have been upfront with Weber about that. But on the other hand, I have read, and I believe there are reports that are out there that I have read that Stan Drayton did not know he was going to land that job with the Chicago Bears until after the interview took place, which was after signing day. So the one thing that I think a lot of people in the national media that kind of like you said, it kind of, blew up, Twitter and everything, especially because of the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. A lot of people have either forgotten or just have chosen to forgotten that Stan Drayton interviewed in 2013 with Florida Atlantic for their head coaching position. So my point is that it wasn't a complete surprise that Stan Drayton was always looking to continually advance in the coaching profession. I will merely suggest that the timing was very poor. I have nothing but praise for Stan Drayton for the job he did with Ohio State's running backs. I wish him nothing but the best with his career going forward with the Chicago Bears, and I'm equally excited that Ohio State hired Tony Alford as Stan Drayton's replacement, and I can only hope this is all basically water under the bridge with Mike Weber and his family. That's
Right.
the way I see it.
Right, and I think that's what's going to happen once he gets on campus. I think that's just going to blow over. He's going to get with his teammates, and he's just going to go out and have fun. I think that's what is the thing that people are missing, and they're kind of taking it from the Homer perspective by saying that he was a guy, so he needs to stay in Michigan because that's how it works. And like I said before, it is a serious homework assignment to be a recruit nowadays, and Mike needed to do his homework, and you can't blame I'm sorry, was it Drayton?
Yes.
The name of the you can't blame him for trying to do better things for him and his family. So at the end of the day, men are going to take jobs that are themselves and for their family. So I can't blame them. But you are right. The timing was a bit much. But as they say, all is fair in love and war. And if it helped Ohio State gain a recruit over Michigan, then more power to them. It worked in their favor, and I can't blame them for it. I'm sure that Michigan staff has said something to a recruit at some point, promising them the world, and they fell short a bit as well. So I think people need to just pump the brakes, wait to see how the situation pans out, because over the course of the 2-3 days that had happened, people's hair was on fire for no reason at all, and this kid hasn't even played one down in college football yet, so people don't need to rush and judge a decision on who Mike is as a person and who he is as a football player for many years to come, if any at all. So I think that if people just kind of relax and let things smooth over by themselves, this will be, like you said, water under the bridge. I think that he's going to be a very productive football player, and I think that in Urban Meyer's system, he might be a guy who mirrors what Ezekiel Elliott does. And that is high praise, and like I said, he's never taken a college snap yet. But there's a lot of potential with Weber, and there's a lot of potential with him on this with this coaching staff. So if guys can kind of just let that blow over and let bygones be bygones, I think that he can be a very, very productive football player.
Well, since we asked you to be on here, and I appreciate that we've spoken a lot of time and devote a lot of time towards what was an obvious subject, with Mike Weber being the object of affection for both of our respective programs that we like. What I'd like to ask you is, looking at the recruiting class that Michigan signed, and I'm not asking you to necessarily be an A1 fortune teller, but if there's a sleeper in this class that, and again, it's a smaller class. And I want to give respect to the, considering borrowing a word that you used on this podcast, a dumpster fire that was earlier in the season and the way everything was happening, and Coach Harbaugh arrived. He wasn't officially hired until almost, like just a little over a month before signing day, so it was going to be a smaller class anyway. Out of 14 guys, is there one player that, if you had to say, right now, it doesn't really have maybe like the fans too excited, but I could see this player developing into, I don't want to say a superstar, but a capable performer or a contributor, maybe not even this year, but down the road? Is there a sleeper in this class that you are kind of pulling for?
Yeah. There is a guy named Grant Perry. He's a wide receiver from Michigan. He was formerly a Northwestern commit because he didn't have an offer from Michigan, and he is a teammate of current quarterback commit Alex Malzone. He was breaking records all over the state of Michigan with Malzone, and it was just a matter of time until some staff realized that this guy can play football. The first staff that really noticed it was Northwestern, and they offered him a scholarship, and he took it because that was the best option for him in that time. But once Michigan came in and he met the new staff and was finally offered, I think that was the biggest landing for them, simply because of his potential. I know that he was I want to try to find you the actual statistics that he had, but of course I didn't do my homework. Like I said before, in a question before this, I was saying coaches and recruits have to do their homework, and I didn't do any of it. I apologize.
Oh no, I because there are certain, for example, a few weeks ago when we were talking about Ohio State's recruits, there's a player by the name of Rashad Berry who I said I'm kind of pulling for just because Berry was a later addition to the recruiting class. When I mean later, like we're talking, probably, like November, December-ish. I can't remember precisely, but the kind of guy that could play on either side of the ball. And during his press conference, Coach Meyer, they listed Berry as a tight end. And my rationale for saying Berry was maybe a sleeper was because, for example, the fact that he was very versatile, and it was kind of a depleted area. So I have one last question, and I think this is one of the most important ones before I turn you loose, and I want you to give this some honest thought before we have another guest coming on to talk about Penn State. And now this is important. I want you to give this some serious thought, okay? Now, the last question I have for you is recently Coach Harbaugh commented that one of the best things about being back in the Midwest is Cracker Barrel. Okay? Something I wholeheartedly agree upon, the importance of a good breakfast, all right?
Okay.
So, if you have the opportunity to eat breakfast with Coach Harbaugh, what are you ordering from Cracker Barrel? Because I think that's an important thing that you get a chance to sit down with the head man. What are you going to have at Cracker Barrel? I could tell you what I'd have, but I'm more interested in what you would have.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not sure if anybody knows this, but I'm a Jersey-born kid. I'm 22 years old, so I haven't had much country in me, but I know enough that Cracker Barrel is the spot to go. I would go personally. I would do fried chicken because I can. That would be the number one thing I would go to. I'm a grease lover, a fried food fanatic, if you will. That's what I would go with. Maybe a little bit of mashed potatoes, some corn, a nice glass of lemonade, and of course I pick up the tab. I have to. Out of respect.
Okay. So you would actually have you wouldn't have breakfast. You would just have I mean it's all good. I mean it's all good. Like if you want like a triple bypass, good. But like I'm just saying,
Like an actual breakfast? You want like an actual breakfast?
Well, you see, to me, I'm thinking more of like the Mama's French toast breakfast, because you get four slices of French toast. You get 2 eggs. I'm getting scrambled eggs. I'm gonna have the French toast with just I'm happy with just the syrup. I'm gonna have some thick sliced bacon. Big cup of coffee.
That sounds literally exactly what I would have. That sounds perfect.
I'm not trying to steer you. I'm just trying.
No, not at all.
Coach Harbaugh. Like I said, it's like, as soon as I read that, I'm like, there you go. There's a guy who appreciates a good breakfast. So.
I don't think you were steering me wrong. I think you were guiding me towards the light. That's exactly what I did.
All right. Well, David, you're certainly welcome to stay. But if you would like to sign off. I'm going to leave it up to you. I definitely want to, thank you for coming on the podcast, detailing Michigan's signing class. I just want to, give everyone your contact info again. It's at David Mormino, Mormino. He's proud member of the Big House Report staff, co-host on @GoBlue Radio. Certainly would look forward to having you on the podcast again. Maybe like to talk about spring ball or other things.
Hey, we can talk about anything you want. You want to talk about Red Robin? We want to talk about Cracker Barrel. We can talk about anything at all.
Okay. See,
I'd be more than happy.
We are, we're thawing that détente in the relationship. It's like we can find common ground with food. Absolutely.
Hey, that's fine with me. I'm only 150 pounds soaking wet with cinder blocks in my hand, but I'm a fat kid at heart. So if you guys want to talk about food, football, anything, you got it. I appreciate.
Just as long as we don't get Jeremiah and Chick-fil-A in Illinois going.
Yeah,
anything. We'll go all your guys' way. Anything you guys want, we'll take it. Something you guys don't want, we won't go that way. I promise you.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. I hope you guys have a great rest of the show. Enjoy yourselves, and I'm very, very hopeful to come back soon.
Absolutely, David.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you guys. Have a great night.
You too. Thank you. Mr. McGuire.
You guys got me hungry just talking about it.
All right. Okay. Well, something I'm a confession here is I forgot what's the name of the cheesesteak place that you say is better than
Tony Luke's. Tony Luke's.
Okay.
Yeah. If you get a chance, take my word for it.
Okay. Well, no, you're a trustworthy guy. It's like so you're not a Pat's or a Geno's guy. It's Tony Luke's.
I don't think you can go wrong with any of them, to be honest with you. But if I had to choose between them, I'd probably go towards Tony Luke's.
Okay. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, want to thank not only David Mormino for joining us, but I'd also like to welcome a previous guest to the Men of the Scarlet and Gray podcast, Mr. Kevin McGuire. And for those of you who may have forgotten, you can reach Kevin via Twitter @KevinOnCFB. He's a college football writer on @CFT Talk. Has an outstanding website and podcast of his own at no2minutewarning.com. How have you been doing, man?
I have been trying to keep busy. This is the off season, but I think we're quickly realizing that there really is no off season because there's just so much that's always seeming to go on. I'm trying to catch my breath though, but I think now's a good time to do that.
So, are you enjoying this beautiful winter weather we're having?
You know what? I could do without the cold so much. It's been just constant cold, and I'm not trying to be one of those people that complains about the cold because I understand that this is the time of year when it's going to be cold, and I'm okay with that. We haven't had a lot of snow where I am. It's been mostly up north in Boston area that's been getting hit hard, but we've been having some bitter cold temperatures for extended periods of time. So I'm looking forward to a day when we can be in the 40s and kind of say that, hey, this is pretty nice.
Yeah, it was. I want to say I'm speaking to you from Avon Lake, Ohio, which is a suburb on the west side of Cleveland, and I think we had a balmy 17-degree high at one point today.
Yeah.
So
hey, let's not talk about how cold it got. Actually, was it Sunday and Monday?
Yeah, exactly.
It's been in the negatives.
Yeah.
That's not including the wind chill.
Woke up yesterday and it was -2 degrees, and I think we got up to 2 degrees by around 10 o'clock in the morning. I was like, all right. So
It's difficult to think of spring football actually, being around the corner, like you said. The idea of, like, the off season, that it's kind of difficult to envision spring football, but like you said, it's a great thing. It's a great thing to contemplate that. Hopefully spring will be here sooner rather than later.
It is a warm thought. That helps us get by.
All right. So what I've got a bunch of questions for you.
All right.
Regarding Penn State's recruiting class, because it was arguably just. I mean, I follow recruiting rankings, but I don't necessarily follow like, okay, well, it was so much better than. This class was infinitely better than somebody else's. Like the fact that Penn State was, I want to say, in the top 15, if I'm not mistaken, by recruiting. I know Ohio State was in the top 10. That's why I'm just kind of being very subjective. Am I at least in the right ballpark in terms of like the rankings?
Yeah, I think most of them had them, fringe top 15, maybe a little bit, maybe a couple spots higher depending on who you're talking to. But yeah, I think top 15 I think is a pretty consensus.
Okay, so 25 players were signed by Penn State, and so the first question I have for you, and it's okay if you don't know off the top of your head, but of the 25 players that were signed by Penn State, how many of those players enrolled early at Penn State and are going to be participating in spring practice?
Yeah, they had 3 players that were enrolled in January. They were all in-state recruits except for a quarterback who's coming in. So they already had 3 on the board when signing day came around, and I think that's seems like the number that they've had the last couple of years.
Just by design, or?
I think so, and this goes back a couple of years when they lost all those scholarships. Bill O'Brien tried to find ways to kind of get some players enrolled early just to kind of maximize what they could do with their roster. And I think that we're seeing some of the carryover of that right now. But the last couple of years they've had 1 or 2 early enrollees, regardless of the status of the sanction and the scholarship situation.
So, I mean, do you anticipate any of these players that were signed of the 3 being able to have an immediate impact in James Franklin's second year?
Mm-hmm. I do. Not the quarterback, obviously. That's going to be Hackenberg going forward. But they have 2 offensive tackles that are coming in, or are already enrolled, and one of them is a junior college transfer. So they're looking to probably get him into the mix. And as you guys know, Penn State's offensive line was a big mess last year, a complete work in progress. And I think that was really one of the focuses they had this season. So they're bringing in a junior college transfer from Lackawanna Community College in Paris Palmer. So he's kind of an upperclassman. You never know really what you're going to get with this junior college guys, but it's an experienced guy that's coming in, kind of add some depth and some size to the line. And then another guy that got in early in January is Sterling Jenkins, who's a 4-star prospect in this recruiting class. So, I don't know how much of an impact he'll have right away, but he's certainly going to be a guy that they're going to look to compete starting this spring.
So I'm glad you mentioned the name Sterling Jenkins, because that leads me to my next point here. All right, and if I mispronounce anyone's last name, it's completely unintentional. So this is more for the benefit of the Ohio State fans who listen to this podcast. So if I mispronounce anyone's names, please correct me. But I'm gonna rattle off some names here. Running back Saquon Barkley of Pennsylvania, offensive lineman Ryan Bates of Pennsylvania, wide receiver Irvin Charles from New Jersey, offensive lineman Steven Gonzalez of New Jersey, offensive lineman Sterling Jenkins of Pennsylvania, wide receiver Juwan Johnson of New Jersey, offensive lineman Paris Palmer of Pennsylvania, running back Andre Robinson of Pennsylvania, and defensive back Garrett Taylor of Virginia. Those are 9 players that were signed by Penn State who had offers from both Ohio State and Penn State, and they all chose Penn State. All right, so the positive as an Ohio State fan that I see is none of these players are from the state of Ohio. That's a good thing for an Ohio guy. Most of these players are from New Jersey and Pennsylvania. So I guess my long-winded question is, considering Coach Franklin has stated that he wants to dominate the state, I think that's what he said at his introductory press conference, and Ohio State is going to continue to recruit New Jersey, Virginia. They're going to try to get in, Pennsylvania, other states along the Mid-Atlantic region. You've got Rutgers, you have Maryland now in the Big Ten, and they're going to try to keep their best players. Now you have Pitt hiring Pat Narduzzi. How big of a challenge is it going to be, do you anticipate, for Coach Franklin to be able to keep their top talent in is what's going to be a hotly contested recruiting area?
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty competitive for years to come, and I think you just outlined all the reasons why. Ohio State's not going anywhere. Very interested to see what Narduzzi can do with Pittsburgh. Rutgers and Maryland, they're not going to go anywhere as far as the recruiting territories are concerned. So there's going to be some competition, and I think I would caution Penn State fans and get excited about this recruiting class, but don't think that this is going to be the norm going forward. I mean, they got a lot of the top in-state talent to stick around, and that's something that obviously Franklin was making an emphasis for. But I think the circumstances that Penn State and Franklin had to work with this season may have been to their benefit, because they had so much space on their roster to fill. They had all 25 scholarships that they could give away. That's not going to be something that happens on a routine basis. So I think going forward, the tone has been set, and now what they do in 2016 is going to be very interesting to see because there's going to be some stiff competition.
Now, can you? This is just more for my education. Can you elaborate on what was going on between Penn State and Pitt with that? I mean, Twitter stuff that yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to make light of it. I'm just for my I mean, because it was one of these things where at one point didn't Franklin even say like that's enough or something like I don't even know what happened. Can you kind of?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that we've seen last year when this Penn State staff came together is they embraced Twitter like no staff had before, and they, to their credit, they make a lot of good use out of it, and I think that's a credit to what they do and how they're connecting with fans and as well as recruits. And then you see Pittsburgh come in and they're changing the guard with their coaching staff, and they're doing a lot of the same things. I'm not necessarily saying that they're copying what Penn State did, but they're doing a lot of the same techniques as far as social media is concerned, and they're throwing out the Twitter messages and the pictures, kind of boasting about Pittsburgh's football program and their history and where they're going forward. And that's what you want to see from a new coaching staff. So Pittsburgh's offensive line coach, whose name I regret to say escapes me right now, but he threw out something along the lines saying that Pittsburgh was the premier program in Pennsylvania. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but Penn State offensive line coach Herb Hand, who is notorious with his Twitter habits, he saw that or had someone point it out to him, and he had a non-direct reply to that, and I forget exactly what they said, but the two of them went back and forth a little bit, and while they weren't mentioning each other in the tweets, it was obvious that they were going back and forth a little bit, and it's kind of fun, but I think James Franklin came in and he kind of wanted to make sure that this wasn't going to escalate too much before it gets out of control, and I'm okay with that. So I think it's good to have some momentum. It's good to have some enthusiasm on Twitter, but just know the limits and keep in mind Penn State and Pittsburgh are going to be playing again in 2016, the start of a 4-year series, a long awaited for a lot of fans. So the next year is going to be very entertaining, I think, from the Twitter sphere.
Now, I mean, I don't want to minimize the importance of recruiting the entire state, but would it be accurate to say that and again, I don't want to make you try to speculate as to what Pat Narduzzi's focus is going to be, but with Penn State being more towards the central and eastern portion of the state of Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh being more in the western, would you kind of say that they're going to probably divide, from maybe like Pittsburgh, over, to the west and Penn State to the east, like in terms of, is that how you anticipate like the recruiting battle being, between those two in-state powers, or how do you see it in terms of like just the entire state of Pennsylvania?
Well, Pittsburgh has traditionally recruited very well on the western side of the state. And there's a lot of good talent on that side of the state, so it's to Pittsburgh's advantage to try and keep as much of that close to home as possible. And it's an area where Penn State have really not attacked very well. I mean, you can go back to Terrell Pryor, of course, out of that area. So, I think one of the things we're seeing with Penn State now is they're trying to make a more serious push into Western PA, and I think a lot of that had to do with the timing, with what's going on with Pittsburgh, with the kind of the changing of the guard at head coach every other year, it seems, and I think that's something that Penn State could have taken advantage of, and I'd be very interested to see where it goes going forward. But I think that there are going to be some real intense recruiting battles in the West. Maybe not so much in the central part, and on the eastern part, I still think Penn State will have the upper hand for the most part when it comes to the in-state recruiting. But Pittsburgh and Penn State, I think, are going to do some serious battles out west.
I'm looking forward to it. I thought the world of Pat Narduzzi as a defensive coordinator, and I think that was a solid move by Pitt to hopefully for their long-term stability. Considering it was kind of like a turnstile for a number of years with their coaching position, but I thought that was a solid move. I'm anxious to see how it all shakes out, especially on the recruiting side of things. So. We kind of touched on it, getting back to the recruiting for Penn State, though. The immediate contributors. I mean, you mentioned the offensive line being an area of immense concern for Penn State fans this past season and going forward. But can you give do you think at the running back position, wide receiver, like grooming of a quarterback, who do you see are the immediate contributors in 2015?
I think actually the wide receiver position could be pretty interesting to watch. I don't. Like I said earlier, Hackenberg's going to be your quarterback. The offensive line will maybe have one or two new faces, but they have some upperclassmen that are transferring in. So I don't think we're going to see any of the younger guys really fill those roles. I still think the tight ends are going to be okay, and I think Akil Lynch at running back should be pretty fun to watch this coming season, even though they've got some talented guys coming in at that position as well. But I think the wide receivers could mix it up a little bit, kind of enter maybe a kind of a rotation. I think you go to Juwan Johnson, the kid out of New Jersey, 6'4", 216 pounds, bring a little bit of size that Penn State has tended to lack at that position. And then you get a little bit smaller guy, Brandon Polk, out of Virginia, another kind of 3-star, 4-star guy. Maybe they can put him on special teams. I don't know. But I think that those are probably two guys that I'm most interested to see where they develop and how Penn State wants to use them early on. It could be one of the things that they just have to work them into the position a little bit. But I think if you're looking for anyone who could step in and maybe make some plays this season, that's the position I would go to.
All right, so I'm going to ask you, it's kind of difficult to imagine considering we talked about how bitter cold it is right now. Unless you are into ice fishing, I'm going to ask you to use an analogy of, I'm not sure if you enjoy fishing as a leisure habit or anything, but I'm sure you have heard the expression about the one that got away. Like the fisherman that always talks about, oh, you should have seen the one I had and the one that got away. So using that analogy with Penn State's recruiting class, is there a player that visited Penn State, had expressed interest in Penn State, but when it came time to put pen to paper on National Signing Day, that was the one player that got away that you were just kind of shaking your head and wishing, man, I really wish we had that guy signed?
It actually happened way earlier than National Signing Day. Brandon Wimbush, I think, was the kid who went to Notre Dame. It looked like he was going to be going to Penn State for a while, and then somewhere along that line, he decided to flip towards Notre Dame. And I think he would have actually been a really good addition to this class. Again, not to challenge Hackenberg, but if Hackenberg's going to be leaving after this season, if he has a good year, you may want to have another guy capable of stepping in. And I don't know if they have a top-of-the-line quarterback ready to do that role if that situation arises. And I think Wimbush probably could have been that guy. So I look at him, he's probably the biggest one that got away. There was another wide receiver from in the state, Jordan Whitehead, I think his name is, ended up going to Pittsburgh. And depending on what recruiting service you're talking about, he was the number 1 recruit or number 2 recruit in Pennsylvania. Again, Penn State did very well in the state, so letting one guy get away is probably not a big deal. But I think that's just another guy that they probably would have liked to have too. So
is there, from a different perspective, looking at that 25-man class, do you have a sleeper or two? Because again, they're pretty well. I rattled off 9 guys based on my research and preparation for the podcast. That I follow recruiting, but it's not like I'm not one of these people that follows it daily. It's more along the lines of, oh, this guy, John Doe had an offer, he verbally committed to Ohio State, had offers from Penn State or, other schools, and that I just I remember, some of the names or whatever. So is there a player or two out of this 25-man class that you would say that falls in the sleeper category that you're kind of hoping can become a contributor for Penn State, if not this year, down the road?
I would go on the defensive side, and I look at the 2 cornerbacks they brought in that are, I don't want to say they're sleepers because they're 4-star players, but I feel like they could have a huge opportunity to play a big role on defense in the coming years. Not this year, but 2 years down the line for sure. Garrett Taylor, a kid out of Virginia, and then a kid out of Philadelphia, John Reed, who I'm pretty interested to see. 5'10", 180 pounds, and Garrett Taylor's a couple inches taller. But I feel like that is a position that's going to be of need in the next year or two, and I think that those are 2 guys that probably can compete pretty early on. So I'd be very curious to see how they fit in and how soon they get inserted into the mix.
Now, on the previous segment, when David Mormino was on talking, we were talking about Michigan and about the situation with Mike Weber, the situation where he signed, Stan Drayton left Ohio State to go to the Chicago Bears. Knowing, because again, Kevin, you have some more national responsibilities with NBC Sports and things like that. So knowing that there were other schools around the country who had assistants leave for other coaching positions, like for example, Ohio State quickly secured Tony Alford from Notre Dame. So Notre Dame, their running backs coach, like he left them in the lurch, and it happened at Texas, it happened at Florida, it happened UCLA, all that. So what kind of perspective do you have on this issue as it relates to recruiting? Do you think kids should be able to get out of the signed letter of commitment? I mean, I guess I'm just going to give you the floor on what your thoughts are on that particular issue.
Honestly, I don't know how big of a deal or a problem it really is, because I feel like this is just something that if you're one of the top players out there, you probably have to have this kind of understanding that these things happen. And certainly if you're paying attention to recruiting classes that are happening before you get a chance to sign your commitment letter, you have to understand that the top programs are probably going to have some coaching turnover after you sign, if you sign on signing day. So I'm okay with the idea that if there's one guy that's heading up the recruiting efforts for you from a school, and you end up going to that school largely based on that decision, and then that coach leaves, I'd be okay with reopening the process. But ultimately, I don't know if it's as big of a deal as some people seem to be making it, because like I said, it happens all the time. It happens everywhere. It's not just an Ohio State problem. It's not just a Notre Dame problem or whatever. We're still seeing assistant coaches today. How many days after signing day, still kind of switching from program to program. So it's nothing new. It's not going to happen. It's not going to stop anytime soon. So I think it's just something we have to accept.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's just I just wanted the perspective of someone that it was kind of that pitched battle between on the Twitterverse and on the internet between Ohio State and Michigan fans, but just to get the perspective of someone that didn't necessarily have it impacting for example Penn State, if maybe as I suspected that people were making it out to be a bigger deal than it truly was. So just wanted to get that impression from you. So all right, since we're not going to talk food because I don't want to make you any hungrier than I already are, so I've got Tony Luke's, right? That's the name of it? Okay.
Tony Luke's.
All right, so here's my last question for you, and it's okay if you don't know the answer to this, but I'm just kind of since we're trying to think like warm happy thoughts here in the middle of February. Obviously, it feels almost kind of like college football can't get here soon enough. I know that spring football games are kind of like a mini oasis during the desert of not having actual games. So I know you're pretty well connected with your responsibilities related to NBC Sports, and I know just following you on Twitter that you tweet back and forth information to at fbschedules.com, and I saw recently you tweeted out how the Purdue Marshall game was rescheduled for September 6th. So the questions I have are, number one, do you have any idea when the Big Ten will be announcing its primetime games for 2015? Do you have any idea, like possibly in April or any kind of a teaser or anything like that?
Honestly, I don't know offhand, and I'm trying to recall what kind of time frames we saw with the announcements last season. So I want to say probably later spring, early summer, but I don't hold me to that.
Okay, I like it. That kind of leads me to the second question I have, and I'm thinking it's a strong probability is. What kind of odds do you place on Penn State at Ohio State being a night game October 17th in Ohio Stadium?
I would think that the odds are pretty good. I'm trying to remember what the other big game in the Big Ten is that day. Is it Michigan State, Nebraska, maybe? Or
it's actually that is Michigan State at Michigan.
Okay, that's the other big one. Yeah, so I think I was talking about this before, and I was trying to figure out exactly how this would work. Because we know that Penn State and Ohio State have played a bunch of primetime games the last few years. And if you look at, you figure Ohio State's going to be one of the top teams in the country this year. We'll see where Penn State is. Maybe they're going to be better. But that looks like a very marketable game in the eyes of whoever gets that game. I guess it would be ABC if they're going with that. So I don't think that they would want to pass on that opportunity. But I think the big question is, where is Michigan and where's Michigan State? If Michigan State's still going to be one of those top teams in the Big Ten, and if Michigan is showing some real positive signs, we could see that enter the mix, because you figure that Michigan's probably going to draw some audience views. But to me, if I had to choose between the two games, I'm going with Ohio State, Penn State. Maybe I'm biased, I don't know, but that's just the way I feel that this game would play out. I just think it would be more marketable, looking at it today. And then I think the rest of the games that day, I don't know if they're all that great in some of the other conferences. Again, some of the games escape me, but I feel like Penn State and Ohio State, with all the networks that are covering games these days, I feel like it has pretty good odds to be in prime time.
Right. I mean, I've got some written down for October 17th. You've got, besides the games that we just mentioned within the Big Ten, you have USC at Notre Dame, and that'll be on NBC.
That'll be NBC, right?
And you have Alabama at Texas A&M, which would more than likely be on CBS if.
Right. That would be your SEC game of the week.
Right. So I would just think, to be fair, now I do realize that a few weeks ago, maybe even a month ago, that the athletic director at Michigan, maybe just because it was still kind of the euphoria of just hiring Jim Harbaugh, I thought I saw an article where he said that he wanted to have more night games in Michigan Stadium. So, I mean, as you just said, depending on what kind of year that both Michigan State and Michigan are having, that could be a candidate for that. On the other hand, if Penn State, it's considering it went into overtime, this past season.
The other thing to consider is that if you look at Penn State's schedule, I don't know if you have it in front of you, but the odds are pretty decent that they could be undefeated when they get to that Ohio State game.
I believe it. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like I would think that this would be the ideal primetime game, but I'm
looking at Penn State's schedule right now. They're not going to play a single game outside of Pennsylvania before that October 17th game in Columbus. So, they'll play a road game at Temple. That's in Philadelphia. It's not a big deal. They get Buffalo and Rutgers at home. Maybe we'll see what Rutgers gives them a fight. San Diego State, Army, Indiana, all at home. So the odds of an undefeated Penn State team, regardless of how good they are, I don't think they're all that bad. So I think if you have assuming that Ohio State gets by Virginia Tech, I think if you're looking at a potential matchup of undefeated teams in the same division.
Right, and yeah, I mean, in Ohio State, they're gonna want to amp up the fact that they're charging $125 a ticket for that, anyway. So right. Why not? If you happen to hear from fbschedules.com, or if you can possibly put in a good word for it, or I don't know how that all works. I just know that you seem to always be on the cutting edge in terms of like when games are being announced. So I just thought I would try to get that info from you if you had it.
As soon as I do know anything, you guys will be the first to know.
Okay, awesome. I will hold you to that more so than a sandwich from Tony Luke's. How's that?
Fair enough.
All right. Well, I want to thank for those of you that didn't get the information at the onset, and if you were not following Kevin McGuire, you were missing out. At Kevin on CFB, he is college football writer at CF Talk, and his outstanding website, no2minutewarning.com. Shannon, do you have anything you'd like to ask Kevin before we let him go and get something to eat, since I talked so much about food?
Well, you have me starving right now, so I'm like, my belly's over here growling. I just wish I would have researched more so I could have had some questions to ask. Unfortunately, I didn't do my homework, so that's why I'm sitting back and just being technical support. But I appreciate you coming on and joining us again, Kevin.
Shannon, you can always send me a message on Twitter. We can talk there, too.
There you go.
Yes, we have.
and hey, so we just before we cut you loose, the spring game for Penn State, April 18th, same as Ohio State's, correct?
I believe that is correct.
Okay. So and as of now, I have not seen broadcast for Big Ten Network. I have not seen any kind of announcement from the Big Ten Network about televising it. Shannon and I, we were talking earlier, like Ohio State is doing their traditional men's lacrosse game that precedes the Scarlet and Gray game. So that'll probably mean like an earlier afternoon spring game, which.
I can tell you this: Penn State's spring game is going to be a 4 p.m. kickoff, and I think it's being carried by Big Ten Network.
Okay, there you go. So that's Shannon. So now we know we have basically a triple header of sports activity on April 18th to look forward to between the men's lacrosse game, the Ohio State spring game, and watching how our rival Penn State does in their spring game on Big Ten Network.
Well, I think we're going to have to DVR it because we got, a 2-hour ride back home. So I don't think we're going to be able to watch it live.
There you go.
You don't get BTN to go?
Yeah, but, I'm not going to be sitting there watching BTN to go driving up 71 back home. So
I hear you.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank our good friend Kevin McGuire for joining us again on Men of the Scarlet and Gray. I certainly hope we can have you on to talk either later in the spring when it eventually becomes spring, or at another date we can talk some more about not only Penn State football but Big Ten football, all things college football, anything at all. I certainly hope we can have that again.
Absolutely, guys. It's my pleasure to talk to you guys, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
All right. I'm going to turn it over to my good friend Shannon Summers with probably the best song known in Western civilization. For those of you who forget, my name is Chip Minnick. Shannon, take it away.
Well, before we go, just wanted to announce a couple of things. Number one, we're going to be having a contest here pretty soon for anybody that's interested in the club seats for the spring game. I've purchased a handful of them, and since we've had such a stellar year, I like to give, we here at Men of Scarlet and Gray like to give back to our readers. So we're going to be coming out with a couple of contests in order to be able to give some club seats away for the spring game. Also working on actually having a sponsor for the show right now, and it's kind of personal for me. I know I've talked about it many times before, and just want to bring awareness because most of our target audience is young males, and it's testicular cancer. And if you're a male, you should download an app called Ball Checker, and it'll teach you how to once a month do a self-examination, so that way you could if you find something wrong, you can get to the doctor, get it checked out, get it caught early, be like me, be a survivor. Without further ado, we will leave you with the song, and thank you for listening.
Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!
Michigan, the whole state of Michigan.